Factoring is one of the most important skills to master for success in Algebra 2. Factoring. That's your first blank there. Factoring. Factoring. So this is actually a review skill from Algebra 1, but if it's been a while since you've been in Algebra 1, that's okay. No big deal. I'm going to teach you as if you haven't learned this before. Now, some of you just came from Miss Carolyn, and that's okay. But just know that I'm going to teach it as if you don't know. And so please do not work ahead, okay? So then we have this big blank. What does it mean to factor? What does it mean to factor? Anybody?
Find the greatest common factor.
Okay, find the greatest common factor, but you're using the word inside the definition. Kyle?
Is that where you tree off and get the prime numbers and whatnot?
That's part of it, yep.
Break it down in the simplest form.
Break it into simplest form. Did you see that somewhere on your paper? That's exactly almost word for word. Excellent. Okay, so to factor is to break apart or break down to simplest form. Break down to simplest form. Typically, we're going to have our answers where they're in parentheses like this. This is reverse FOIL or reverse multiplication, if you want to think about it that way. Okay? Here's the thing. There is no one way to factor every time. So some students sometimes say, hey, can you just tell me how to do them all the time? Like all the problems? And that doesn't work because all the problems are not done the same way. So I have this box for you here. Someone remind me what a binomial is. What is binomial? Bi means how many? Two. So this is a binomial. It's a polynomial with two terms. Okay, so a binomial might look like this. If you have x squared plus 6x, that would be a binomial. Okay? The first thing to do with a binomial is to always find the GCF. GCF means greatest common factor. Good. Difference of squares, which you already have learned. If you didn't know it, it's okay. I'm going to refresh your mind. And then later on, we're going to learn about sum and difference of cubes. But for right now, we're not going to use sum and difference of cubes. Okay? A trinomial is how many terms?
3.
3 terms. So this might look like x squared plus 5x plus 6. That might be something of a trinomial. Again, the first thing to do is to always look for your greatest common factor. Then we do a process called x factoring. All right, Miss Carolyn maybe taught you differently, but we're going to x factor. When a is 1, we can take the shortcut. If a is greater than 1, we're going to do a process called splitting the middle. And again, I'm going to teach you all this, so don't panic. And then 4 terms or more is always going to be done by grouping, right? Where you group the first 2 and you group the second 2. But first, you're going to need to look for the greatest common factor. All right? So we already talked about our next blank. What's a polynomial with 2 terms? A binomial. So that's going to be your blank there. Binomial. So a binomial is a polynomial with 2 terms. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, if we look at our checklist up there, when I have a binomial, I look for the GCF. Do we have a GCF? Is there a common factor between x squared and 12x? What do you guys say? Yes, what is it? X, right? So the x is in common. So what I'm really doing is I'm dividing this by x and I'm dividing this by x. That's what it means to factor. You divide it out. So when I divide the x out, it doesn't just go away. It goes to the front. And what am I left with? What is x squared divided by x? X. And then 12x divided by x, you guys said is?
12.
Just 12. So that would be if you are subtracting, but we're dividing here. This can't go any further. So this is my answer. Let's look at example 2. What do they have in common on example 2? They have a y
5 and 1.
and a 5, right? So you have to look at the numbers too. So that means I'm dividing this by 5y, and I'm dividing this by 5y. But if I divide by it, where does it go? To the front. What is 15 divided by 5? 3. And my y's cancel. And then 5 divided by 5 is, it's 1, but we don't have to write the 1, right? Y cubed divided by y squared. This is finished. It can't go anymore. Okay? What about example 3? Is there a greatest common factor with example 3?
No.
No. Okay, so then what's next on our list? After GCF, look up there in the gray box. After GCF, it says what? Difference of squares. What does difference mean in math? Subtraction. And squares, we're going to look for perfect squares. If you don't know what a perfect square is, remember we have like 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, 4 squared is 16. You guys remember that? Okay, 5 squared is 25. So one of the easiest ways to look at this is to say, all right, I don't have a GCF, but I know that it's subtraction. What is the square root of p squared? Just p. So we're going to set up 2 parentheses. I have a p here and a p here. What is the square root of 36? 6 here and a 6 here. And those of you that were in Miss Carolyn's class last term, what do you remember are the signs? One's plus, one's a minus. Does it matter which one comes first?
No.
Okay. This is why it needs to be plus or minus. Because if you were to multiply these back together, doing the FOIL like we did yesterday, remember how we did this one times this one and this one times this one, or whatever? You get p squared plus 6p, you don't need to write this down, minus 6p minus 36. What is 6p minus 6p? Nothing. So this becomes p squared minus 36, which is what we started with, right? So that's why there needs to be 1 plus and 1 minus. This is our answer right here. Okay, so let's look at example 4. Is there a GCF here?
No.
Is there a GCF between 100 and x squared? No? Okay, so the next thing I look at is difference of squares. Is 100 a perfect square?
Yes.
Yes? Is x squared a perfect square?
Yes.
Yes. So do not switch the order around, because that's going to give you a different answer. What is the square root of 100?
10.
Okay, so set up your parentheses. 10 and a 10. What is the square root of x squared?
Yes.
So I have an x and an x. One's plus, one's minus. Okay. Let's try this problem. I'm going to make another one at the bottom or out to the side. Let's try this example. (36 minus 9y squared). 36 minus 9y squared. Can you guys see that over there? 36 minus 9y squared. Are those perfect squares? 36 and 9 are, right? Okay, so what's the square root of 36? And what's the square root of 9y squared? 3y, right? Now my question to you is this fully factored? 6 minus 3y, 6 plus 3y. Is that fully factored?
Isn't there a greatest common factor?
Okay, so Kyle and Brianna are reminding us. Okay, look, if this is where you finish your problem, it would be wrong. Because 6 and 3, you can divide out a 3 from this group, and you can divide out a 3 from this group, right? But what is 3 times 3? 9. That means you should have from the beginning divided out a 9. So before you even did the square root, what's this divided by 9 and this divided by 9? That gives me 4 minus y squared. From the beginning, you always need to divide by the greatest common factor. Otherwise, your answer will not be correct. And what's the square root of 4?
2.
You guys sticking with me? Come on, finish it out with me. A 2 and a 2. And what's the square root of y squared? Y and a y. One's plus, one's minus. And we bring our 9 down. So, like I told you yesterday, Algebra 2 is taking Algebra 1 and taking it up a notch. So you didn't really have to do this in Algebra 1, where you're going to have the greatest common factor from the beginning. You will see that a lot in Algebra 2. Okay? All right, let's flip over to the back. What is a polynomial with 3 terms?
Trinomial.
Good, trinomial. That's your blank there. A polynomial with 3 terms is a trinomial. Okay, if you look on the gray sheet or the gray box, what do we do first with a trinomial? Check for what? Okay, is there a greatest common factor in number 5?
No.
I can pull an x out of the first 2 terms, but I can't pull an x out of the 10, right? Okay, so this is where the fun begins. This is called now x factoring. So we're going to make an x over here. The top number is going to come from, there's a 1 right in front of that x. These 2 multiplied together. What is 1 times negative 10? That number is going to go up top here. It's the same thing that Carolyn taught you. It just looks a little different, okay? So we are going to look for numbers that multiply to get a negative 10 and then add to get a negative 3. I put an a above the negative 3. That negative 3 is going to go down here. Okay, so we're going to multiply to get a negative 10. We're going to add to get a negative 3. If you are not strong with your multiplication, then over to the side, you need to think about what makes 10. 1 and 10, 2 and 5. But if we need a negative 10, then one of these needs to be negative, right? Or I can do 1 and negative 10, 2 and negative 5. Josh?
5 and negative 2.
5 and negative 2. Would anyone agree with that?
Yeah.
Is that going to add?
Then you get positive 3.
Okay, right? You see that, Josh? We want a negative 5 and a positive 2. Those two numbers. Yeah, is that what I said? Negative 5 and a positive 2. Those two numbers are going to go on the sides of your x. Because the a value is 1, and our a value is right here. Okay, this is our a value. Whatever number is there in front of the x squared, which a was 1, then we are allowed to just take the shortcut. And the shortcut says to set up your parentheses. We're going to split up that x squared to be an x and an x. And then the two numbers that go in the parentheses are the two numbers that we chose over here. It doesn't matter which one goes where. So I can put a negative 5 and a positive 2. Or you can put the positive 2 and then the negative 5. It doesn't matter. If we were to multiply these back together, we would get this answer. So that would be fully factored. Okay? Let's look at number 6. It's going to be the same thing. What do we look first for? What do we look for first, I mean? Common factor. Is there a greatest common factor, Quentin? In number 6, is there a greatest common factor?
No.
What is it? Thank you, Quentin. But before we divided 2 out, is there something that anyone sees as different about this one? A little weird? It's not in standard form, right? Like the x is on the end, and isn't the x usually in the middle? You guys see that? Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is rewrite this. 2x squared, and I'm going to switch these locations. Otherwise, it's going to throw me way off. And then Quentin reminded us that I can divide the entire problem by 2. So I'm going to divide the entire problem by 2. But where does that 2 go? It doesn't just disappear. Where does it go? To the front. So I have x squared minus 5x minus 6. Now I can do the x factor thing. Okay? So what numbers multiply to get, remember there's a 1 here, 1 times negative 6 is negative 6, and they add to get a negative 5. So your add number will always come from the middle term here, and multiply will always come from the first times the last, always. Okay? Okay, wait. Just a second. Let your classmates think about it for a minute. Again, if you don't remember, we can do 1 and negative 6. We can do negative 1 and 6, negative 2 and 3, 2 and negative 3. Now this one's a little bit tricky because 2 and 3, when I add them together, are 5. But when I make one of them a negative, I don't get 5, right? So what should we use here? Let's see. Emily Harris, what 2 factors should we use? To multiply to get a negative 6 and add to get a negative 5.
You can use a negative 1 and 6.
If you add negative 1 and 6, you're going to get a positive 5. And we want a negative 5. So which one should I use?
1 and negative 6.
That's right. 1 and negative 6. I would agree with that. So 1 and negative 6 are going to go here. Go back to our problem and we set up our parentheses. Put an x in each of them. And then remember we use our factors that we chose. So positive 1, a negative 6, and then what do we have to remember to bring down? The 2. Excellent. Bring that 2 down in front. Questions so far? Okay. Let's look at example 7. What's the first thing we do with example 7? Greatest common factor. What is the greatest common factor on number 7, Amanda? What's the greatest common factor on number 7? 2. We maybe a 4, but that's too much. Okay, so 4 can't go into all of those. So instead, I'm going to divide the whole thing by 2. So it leaves me with 2n squared plus 9n plus 7. So we kind of forget about this 2 for a minute. Okay, we're going to put it off to the side. When we do our x factor, remember we need to do the first times the last. So what is 2 times 7? 14. So 2 numbers that multiply to get 14 and add to get what, Chelsea? What do they need to add to get? 9. Good, that middle number. Okay, so, yes, Brianna?
Is that only when the number, do you only have to do that when the number in front of the n or whatever?
N squared, the quadratic term.
Is more than 1?
Yeah, well, actually, you actually are doing it every time, right? You do like 6 times 1, and it's not going to change it. It's still going to be 6, right? So technically, you are already doing that always, but when there's a 1 there, it doesn't change the number, okay? So what 2 numbers are we going to use? What multiplies to get 14 and adds to get 9? Everyone together?
7.
Good. Now, here's the problem. If you do this, n plus 7 times n plus 2, if you were to write this and you were to multiply these out, you would get n squared plus 9n plus 14. Is that what our answer is here?
No.
No. So the problem is when the number is greater than 1 right here, you cannot just take the shortcut and set up your problem. We have to do what's called splitting the middle. Okay? So splitting the middle, and you can check yourself as you're doing that to figure out if it's going to work. The first thing we do, and this process will work always, bring down 2n squared, the first one, and the last one. So we bring down the first term and we bring down the last term. And it's called splitting the middle because we're really going to split the middle term. So this positive 9n is going to split between the two factors that I chose. Now, it does not matter whether you write the 7 first or the 2 first. You're going to get the same answer. But for the sake of factoring, what might go better with this 2n squared? A 2 or a 7? The 2, right? So in the middle, I'm going to write plus 2n because it's coming from the n term. Plus 7n because it's coming from the n term. Because would you guys agree if I add 2 plus 7, I'm getting back at the 9n, right? If I add those together. Who remembers what we do now? Now that I have 4 terms. What do we do?
Combine.
No?
You have to factor the first 2 terms and the...
Yep. What's that process called? Starts with a G?
Grouping.
There we go. Grouping. Now, guys, pay attention right here. Whatever this third sign is, needs to go on the inside of the parentheses. Okay? That sign of that third term needs to go on the inside of the parenthesis. All right, so now we're going to factor what divides by 2n squared and 2n? 2n, right? So I'm going to divide by 2n, divide by 2n. But if I divide by it, where does it go? Goes out to the front, right? It doesn't just go away. We're left with n plus 0. Oh, right? Anything divided by itself is always 1. Okay, what about the second group? What can I pull out of the second group, Hortensia? 7. Okay, so I'm going to divide by 7. Divide by 7. One more step and we're done. What's the common factor between these two? What do both of these things have in common? An n plus 1. You guys see that? They each have an n plus 1. Okay, so we're going to write n plus 1. We're pulling out the common factor, and then what's left is the 2n plus 7. That goes together in a parenthesis. This is finished. Now, that seems like a lot of steps, but we talked a lot through that. Okay? All right, so I'm going to leave that example there. Let's go over to example 8. I think doing another one will be helpful. Go ahead.
Would you do that too, like from the very beginning?
Oh, Kyle reminded us. I forgot. This 2 from the very beginning has to come down, right? Thank you, Kyle. So we have a 2 that has to go in front.
Not as 4 in or whatever.
No, you just leave it as 2. Because this 2 in right here got caught up with that 7, right? Good thing you reminded us. Okay, does number 8 have a greatest common factor? No. Okay, so we're going to start it by just doing the first times the last to make our x. So doing the first times the last. So negative 3 goes on top. What goes on the bottom, Paula?
Negative 2.
Negative 2. So negative 3 goes on top. Negative 2 goes on the bottom. Okay, so think about what factors you need there. James, what numbers do we want? What makes negative 3 when you multiply? Okay, 1 and 3, right? But which one needs to be negative so that when we add together we get a negative 2? What? The 3, right? So when I add those two together, I should get a negative 2. So I'm going to use 1 and negative 3 here. Now, remember the steps. The first one comes down, the last one comes down. Then I'm going to split the middle term by the 2 factors that I chose. And does it matter which one goes first? It doesn't. For the sake of this example, I would like us to all put the 1 first so that I can show you what happens. Because inevitably, students get to a problem like this and they have no idea what they're doing because they didn't do one like this in an example. So let's put the plus 1v minus 3v right here. For the sake of this example, please write it like this. Okay, so then the second step is to group them together. Remember, take that negative sign on the inside of the parenthesis. What can we pull out of the first group? We can't pull a 3 out, right? Because that 1 can't divide by 3. So what's the only thing we can pull out here? What? A V? Okay. So the only thing I can pull out of this first group is a V. If I pull it out, it goes out front. What is 3V squared divided by V? Just 3V, right? And what is 1V divided by V? 1. All right, what about the second group, this negative 3V minus 1? What can I pull out of that? Negative 1. Excellent. Here's the rule, guys. If the third term is negative, if whatever that term is right here in the beginning, if the beginning of the parenthesis is negative, you always pull out the negative with it. Always. No matter if this term is negative or not, if this one is negative, always pull the negative with it. Okay? So we're going to divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1. Remember, if we divide by it, it goes out front. And negative 3 divided by negative 1 is just 3V, right? Negative 1 divided by negative 1 is positive 1. Okay, Tish, what's our greatest common factor here? What do we have in common with both of these? Right, the 3V plus 1, right? I have that in common for both of them. So I write that one time, because I'm pulling out the common factor. And then whatever I have left in my circles here, that might be helpful for some of you. That goes in my second parentheses. Your parentheses need to be touching, like this. That means multiplication. If they're not touching, that means what's happening between them, I don't know. Okay? This V right here, it goes over here with this one. Okay? All right, a polynomial with 4 or more terms is called a what? Good. Who said that? That was kind of a trick question. A polynomial with 4 terms is just called a polynomial. All right? Okay, so mark that down there. Polynomial with 4 terms is just called a polynomial. And what's the first thing we do? Look back on your paper. What's the first thing we do when we have a polynomial? Now, it has to come out of all 4 terms. So if you are looking at number 9, is there something that comes out of all 4 of those numbers? No. Okay, so then what's my second step? Grouping. And we actually just did grouping in the problems above. So I'm going to group these 2 together, these 2 together. Go ahead and group and see what you can pull out. And we'll see if we get the same answer. You want to stand up here? You want to stand? Okay. Okay, so what can we pull out of the first group?
4 into the second minus n.
I could pull out a 4 into the second?
No.
Just into the second. Okay? Just an n squared out of each of them. Remember, if we divide out by it, it goes out to the front. And I'm just left with 4n. What is n squared divided by n squared? 1. Okay. Anthony, what are we going to pull out of the second group?
5.
A 5. I would agree with that. If we pull it out, it goes out to the front. Good. 4n minus 1. Notice you have the same thing in parentheses. You should always have the same thing in parentheses. If you don't, you've made an error somewhere. So I'm going to write what I have in parentheses. And then whatever I divided by goes in the next parenthesis. Okay, I want you to try example 10 and check with your neighbor when you get done. Example 10 and check with your neighbor. So then your next step is going to take those in one parenthesis. So 4 minus 1 in one parenthesis. And then in the next parenthesis is what you pulled out. N squared and the 5. Negative 5. There you go. You're done. Should be a positive 5, Patrick. Okay, start the next one and then check with your neighbor. You may use your calculator if you need to. Okay, so you're alright. We're going on break soon. Work that one out for me. Is that what your neighbor has? Yep. Okay. So what goes into 24? What did you get, Josh?
Oh, you know what? I meant 7.
Okay. Again, you pull out a 7 from each of these, right? The 7 goes into 35 and 42. Go bigger than that, bigger than 2, because these should match up. So what number bigger than 2 goes into both of those? Okay.
I did that last time. You helped me last time. I'll help you this time.
No, not while I'm teaching. So like while you're doing action work, that makes sense. Okay, looks good. Elena, what'd you pull out of the first group?
7n squared.
Okay. Shh. Pulling out a 7n squared here. What'd that leave you with, Elena? Ladies. 5n plus 6. Patrick, what'd you pull out of the second group?
I didn't get that far.
Okay, what can you pull out of 20 and 24?
4.
A 4. Leaves you with 5n plus 6. Cynthia, what do we have in common? What do we write first?
5n plus 6.
5n plus 6. Does it really matter which parenthesis comes first?
No.
No. Chelsea, what's my second parenthesis?
7n squared plus 4.
7n squared plus 4. Raise your hand if this is what you have on your paper. Excellent. Most of you are there. Does anyone have any questions? No? You feeling okay? All right. Let's take a break, please, until 10 after 2. I want everyone to go take a break. Everyone get up.